Hey guys, welcome to this Q&A. We've had a question sent in about creating waves on beaches. So this person wanted lapping waves on a shoreline. While that is possible in view, we are limited obviously to the restrictions within the software. We can't get actual nice flowing um, what do you call it, wave crests that collapse onto the beach. But what we can do is have a displaced wave that will actually visibly go up the beach and then back down. There's a couple of ways we can do this. There's also a few different things to be aware of before actually creating these waves. So we'll get started. What I've got here is a scene which I've just done for demonstration purposes. I've just got a cone here, which I've flattened out, and I've added a C, and if I just turn off displacement, in fact I'll turn down the agitation to 50. So this is what we've got here. It's got a silly little atmosphere. And to show you what it looks like, we can see the waves coming down from above from the top of the shot that we've got here, and we've got the foam forming around the cone, which stretches off into the depths of. Delete that. We might be able to see it. No. So I hope nothing's actually animated through here. Yeah, nothing has. So I've just added a keyframe to the cone at 200 frames, just in the same spot, so that we've got a couple of frames to work with. And first step is obviously finding out which direction you want your waves to go in. Once you've dropped your C onto that, you just have to tweak your wind direction. 180 degrees will make them come down from the top. If we go 90 degrees, I believe that'll be from the right. It'll either be right or left. I'll just render that and we'll find out in just a moment. Okay, so the rendering's going. We can stop that. 10 frames is enough. Yep, they're coming from the right now. So if you see our preview here, you can see that the waves are moving from right to left at 90 degrees. So the moral of that story is that the wind direction shows where the waves will come from, which kind of makes sense. I'm going to leave it at 90 degrees, and I'm going to leave our overall agitation at 90%, so that we've got a very visible wave here. Ticking displaced water surface. Now this is the best solution I could find for creating these. There's two others, I think, but this one will get you the most natural results for the least amount of work. So down here, once I've ticked the displacement, you can see in the wireframe here we've got a bit of up and down displacement on that. And now this will probably take longer to render than the second method or third method, but as I said, could possibly take you a lot less time in terms of effort. So I'm just turning down my foam because I'm not a huge fan of the view foam. So we've got our waves coming from right to left now. We're going to have them starting to lap up against this shoreline of our cone. So I'm going to set this to render at, say, 2 frames a second. I'm going to set it to final, and I'm going to render this. I'm probably sitting on 30 frames a second, so I don't really need that, but maybe not actually be able to see that. Oh, we can. So the most important thing with your terrain that you're using in these sensors is you have to, if you have a beach, you have to understand how a normal beach will work. And in terms of geometry, you cannot have a lower point as the beach comes up. You just got to make it really smooth, really flat, and just a constant incline. So, because otherwise, and you can see now we've got our water coming up. So what happens if you've got undulating terrain is you'll get pockets of water as they go through the terrain. I can demonstrate this just by dropping down another terrain next to us, and we'll go just drop down, and where's our view here? Let's find that terrain. Let's go over here and see if we can find one. So the issue will be, and I can see one just in here right now. Whoa, that's too bright. What I'll do is I'll just set my seawater to extremely dark, and might have to just drop this down, find that point again. That'll do. That'll show it. Okay, so see this point here. If this was your terrain, which is obviously very basic, but you've got your waves coming onto it, and then they end up creating patches like this, which are not at all realistic. This sort of stuff, you want to avoid that because it will really spoil the animation that you've got. So the important thing there is, let me go back to our other camera, to have a nice even gradient. It doesn't have to be straight like this, it just has to continue up as it goes up. And in fact, it looks like we've got a little bit of a problem here. Yeah, that there. And this is, so even with an even gradient like this, we're still getting pockets like this. This would never happen in with a proper liquid, because this area would be filled in. Once the earth beneath the water becomes higher, the water will start to spread out more. Whereas what's happening on here is the water is simply being animated through the surface, so we just don't see it on the other side. So that's going to play havoc, and this is where I say, if you have to do it in view, do it in view. Otherwise, something like getting real flow or some sort of dynamic software, particle effects, things like real flow is the only example I can think of right now, and creating a wave system through there and comping it in Nuke or something like that. You might even be able to bring in the real flow data as an animated mesh into view, and then render it in view and comp it later. But that's getting a bit off topic. So what I might do is I'll set this. One thing we can do to fix that that patch that we had, if we do have a nice soft gradient there, like we did before, when we have this, it won't be as noticeable. And this is where I don't like the foam as well in view, because it really outlines the edges of the water. So if I let that render, and once it's done, I'll get rid of the foam completely. We'll render it again, and you can see now we don't have any foam, and this area is a little less obvious to the eye. Alright, so I'm going to render this. In fact, I might just render it out and to an output folder, and I'll show you a couple of other things, a couple of output 2. I'll show you a couple of other examples that I was working on. Let's go 24, that'll do. Actually, let's make this smaller and final. Alright, so on our desktop we've got in output 1, this is what I was working on earlier, which this is actually an animated terrain. This is the third option, which I wasn't able to completely get control over because I'm not exactly incredible with the function editor. I can use it, but there might be someone else out there who's better at it than I am. So there's a couple of mixed examples in there, and this here is another example of the water on the terrain. Sorry about my key clicks. I've got a mechanical keyboard, so you can probably hear them as well. And in this example here, this is another example of an animated terrain lapping the surface of another terrain, and it just has a water material. If I just get rid of that, so we can just loop it. So this particular result I created last week, lost the file, and can't seemingly be able to, for some reason can't recreate it, but I'll show you how I essentially did it. Now, the only issue with something like this, well, there's two issues. One, you can see this dark area through here. Now that's because the whole terrain is getting deeper and then more shallow, and that's allowing us to see deeper and then less deep, and that's not really representative of what happens in real life. And then you can see up here, as we loop through as well, we've got like a puddle of water that goes up, which wouldn't normally happen. The water would start to recede and then go back up and then recede. Unfortunately, that's not possible. Having that flow up and then that recede back is not possible unless you really do some massive work with cyclical fractals, which I'll show you. I'll just open up another. We'll just wait for this to finish, and then I'll show you the cyclic fractals a bit later. Okay, welcome back. We just did a bit more rendering on this. I've removed the texture here just to speed things up a little bit, and I've thrown it into After Effects just to show you. Well, before I show you that, I'll flick over to the full frames and just flick through. You can see exactly what we've got here. This is just preview quality, so pretty noisy, but you can see here at the start of the sequence we get this wave through here, comes through, gets cut off around the front, and then continues to move. Now, one solution to this is you can see we've clearly got a cone. This beach is very rounded, and as I think I've mentioned just earlier, in real life there's an effect that brings the waves to be straight, to be front on to the beach. Not sure what it's called, but it essentially drags the waves around, so it doesn't actually matter which way the wind is going offshore. And if you've ever been on a boat, you'll notice that the waves are not just going straight towards the coast. They slowly move around, and that's why we also get transversal erosion, like sand getting carried down the beach and not just onto the beach. Anyway, there's your lesson for today. The point being, if we want to get rid of this, we need to keep a straight beach, because we don't have the control in view to make these waves curve around this beach. So what we can do is go into view sure I've got enough frames now. And what I do is I grab this cone, and where are we looking? Is that our camera there? Yep, so we are looking at this corner, I'm guessing. And so we grab our cone, grab the local scaling, and if we stretch this, that's the wrong way. If we stretch this that way, out into the distance, and then let's have a look at this from far. So let's say we take this here, and now we've got a much straighter beach, which is being broken up by our displaced water. So this should get rid of a lot of the effects that that we see in this when we flick through it. Now the other problem is this is being rendered at 30 frames a second. I think I'll just double check that for you. Yeah, 30 frames per second every frame. So when we put that into a comp, and say I just make a new composition, 30. Once we actually put that, I might have to duplicate that and make this 30. Drag that in there, and when I press play and it plays back, you can see it's very, very quick. Now there are ways to adjust this in view, but the alternative is, which I prefer because you end up rendering far fewer frames, is to use the comp at half the frame rate. So I've just used 12.5 because it really doesn't matter what frame rate you use for these. These are just arbitrary frames rendering out the animation of the waves. If you want it slower, you go with slower frame rate. So 12.5, and my comp is at 25, and this might seem a little bit off topic at the moment, but as you'll see in a minute, when this plays back, we get a really nice sort of lapping up our beach here. So just keep that in mind that you can slow this down in post rather than worrying about it in view. So there's a couple of things we can see here. We've got quite a lot of agitation in the water. That's up to you on your in your ocean material to change the overall agitation. And if you're not happy with just setting those, you can come into the overall function. You come to default water, and where's it gone? Maybe I've got to come into the foam. Is it in here somewhere? There we go. Foam. There's foam amount. Now, there should be an option here somewhere to to give us options for the waves, but I can't remember. This has happened to me a couple of times. Someone might be able to point me in the direction where I used to think it would come in here. That might actually be with the hard drive spinning up. Actually, that's a good point. If you're wanting the guy who does quad spinner, that's Dax Pandy. He's extremely knowledgeable in the function editor, and he might actually be worth a shot if you're trying to get something in particular done. So if we go to liquids, this is the new physical seawater that we're using, and if we go back to the old water, I wonder if it comes up in the function. There it is. Yeah. So I don't know where it's gone for the physical water. Personally, I really don't like the physical water material. It's not my kind of thing. But in here we can then change the largest wave feature, which if we go back to our ocean, these sorts of big waves through here you may not want. or you might want more of them. It really depends, because at the moment we've got some nice things lapping up through here, and we've got some bigger ones coming through, which may interfere with something else. Like if you've got some plants coming down here, you don't want water hitting them. So okay, so again, just you've got to tweak these a little bit to get the effect that you want yourself. I believe that's pretty much it for this version of how to create the waves with the ocean. The second option we have is creating a two terrains. You can, well, hang on, actually I'll go to the second option. I'll use this as the second option. I'll keep the other one for last, because this should be a little bit faster. We've got a plane, so instead of adding our water plane, we just add a normal terrain plane, and we go and load a default water, or you can go to clear water, but let's go with default water. It adds it there. We edit the material, go down to water. Half the time I always go to, I end up going to bumps without changing the foam, from foam layer to water layer, and I start going, why is the foam displacing? And frustrates the hell out of me because I'm an idiot. Anyway, displacement mapping, you tick that, and that will then displace our plane here, and you can see I think that's the foam coming through the edges. If I just turn that off, it's a bit cleaner. But we then have to make sure that we change our features in here. Now this will create a different effect, and I don't know why it's somehow not. Oh, it is displacing it. It's just not showing me very well. This can be a bit more controllable, because what we can do here is, instead of using our wave function, we can reset this, come in, go, say let's load, not a meta node, let's just right click on the load function, and we can come into something like peels, or find something that's repetitive but more like this, agate. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. If we think the darker areas are the deeper troughs and the white areas are the higher points, wow, that has a lot of. Okay, I think I might just select something a bit more simple than that. In fact, I'll just reset it, and let's see if we can actually find the see if we can find the fractal that we want. So we add a fractal, connect it to the displacement via altitude, and we can use a cyclic fractal, which means we'll get a repeating effect. And let's see what that does. So this is pretty good. Pretty good with this. Obviously, we'll need to tweak a lot of this effect. We've got stuff coming around the terrain. Again, because this is we've zoomed out, and we can see the corners of our cone. But essentially, we've got these ridges here. So if I just zoom in here, and come back to our water. We've got our simple cyclical fractal. Let's change our smallest feature so that we can really clean this up and make sure we're looking at the larger details. That is, periodicity is all about how often the fractal repeats itself. So, but I won't go into that. This is just to show the basics of what to do here. We've still got quite a lot of roughness, so let's just turn that down. Try and get this to just be a nice smooth texture that we can use. So, yeah, that very rough in this preview. Let's try 2. Yeah, let's try that. Okay. Ah, that's just fantastic. That happens more often than I'd care to admit. And then this happens as well, where it doesn't actually recover our scene. That's just fantastic. Let's see if we can recover it again. Nope. Okay, well that's great. Well, I'll just drop down another sphere and I'll recreate the scene. Okay, so I've recreated the scene, and you can see here a preview of what it looks like now. Obviously, hugely inaccurate waves there that we have to tweak. So we just tweak the displacement or the bump depth, and that will change the depth of the amount of displacement that we get on this. So if I just add a keyframe in here, oops, keyframe, come in and let's say 2 frames a second. I'm just going to increase the depth. I'm going to double the depth to 1, and so that you can see it a little bit better. Hopefully you can see it down the bottom here. Of course, we won't see anything because we haven't actually animated the properties. So this is where we come into the effects, and we've got the velocity of the material origin. So if we add a value to one of them, press OK, we should find our terrain start to move. Now it might be because I don't have auto keyframing set on. There are a couple of no, it shouldn't need keyframing. There's a couple of elements in view which are not animated, not able to be animated, and there's even stuff in view which I've found won't animate even though it should be able to be animated, like this. I know for sure that velocity of material origin, you should, if you were to animate the velocity of the material origin, that would be like accelerating and decelerating in a car. If my, there we go, now wants this to be animated, so don't know what it thinks it's doing now. But velocity of material origin is a speed which you set. So if, as long as it is set to higher than 0 at any current frame, it should start moving. And there we go. We've started getting a movement there. So let's go with 12 frames. Check that out. So this is option 2 for creating our waves on our beach. This gives us a little bit more control in some areas, but it does also mean, you know, in that the fact that you can have a plane with a specific cutout. So for instance, we could Boolean this and then shrink it into the terrain so that we don't get waves going, you know, and creating pockets of water, you know, throughout this terrain. And you can see down here there's animation there. So now just remember, I haven't actually dictated a direction. I just changed some of these values to show you that it is able to be animated. These x, y, and z coordinates refer to here. And what I've found is if you set, say, x to 5, it'll be 5 in this direction. I don't know why. I think that's because if you think of a graph, x and y, no, it doesn't make sense. But nevertheless, I was testing this earlier today and getting extremely confused as to why changing the x value would move the waves up and down. So it might have just been that scene, but again, it's a matter of just checking which one works and trying that. Now the z axis is for that vertical change. So terms of waves, I would suggest adding a little bit of velocity there. That might just, because if you think about the form of a wave, the wave doesn't just have a shape and then stay the same the whole way through its movement. It cycles through and it changes as it moves, and that's what the z axis will do. The x and y will move it in a direction from top down, which is what we primarily want to do, but the z will change its overall shape. I wonder if I can set this to say that, and I wonder if this will demonstrate it. Yeah, it is showing it. Just leave that to go for a while. The third option is the one that I've left till last because I can't actually get it to work like I did the very first time I tried it. And it's similar to this, but instead of animating the material origin and displacing it, we are animating or at least we're attempting to animate the fractal. But as you can see here, we've got a little bit of movement through and lapping of the waves. So this could be good for things like if you're in, say, a lake where there's no real directional movement, but there is a bit of choppiness, or say a pool where there's just random ups and downs in the waves. You can set the z axis to quite a high value. But in general, I'd probably suggest keeping it lower, but certainly turning it on. So to go to our third option and finish this off, that's not the right terrain. We chuck down a function terrain, and we come into our parameters here. We're just going to reset this function. We're going to turn off zeroed edges because we don't want it to curve off at the sides, seeing as water is flat. Come in here and we just connect us at whatever fractal you want, and you've got to connect the time to the top inputs. Now I can show you an example of where that happens, where you click on the open ocean fractal, which is an option, by the way, if you want to use the open ocean fractal as on a terrain. That can work okay. I'll show you what this sort of effect has. If we just load up a material here, fingers crossed that works. Yep. Now I was having some trouble with transparency earlier. Hopefully, oh no, that's fine. Hopefully it doesn't do that now. No, it's working. That's good. Okay, so now when I render this, you can see that we've got a terrain with the open ocean fractal attached to it, and what that is now doing is changing the shape of this terrain as time passes. Right. So, and this is the way that I would, if it was me, I would prefer doing it this way than using either of the other two options. The problem is that I cannot for the life of me figure out how to extract this parameter here. Now I would have thought that you could simply extract the origin of the material and say tell the function editor to over time add whatever value per second to the x coordinate. Now, as I said earlier, I'm not amazing with all these options, so you just have to excuse me. Sorry about that. Okay, so what we'd preferably be able to do is separate out these parameters and attach them to the time constraint. Unfortunately, I don't know how to do that, and there was a point where I was able to do it and I can't get back to it, so that really sucks. But that's essentially what you want to do. The problem here is that because this parameter has been extracted and already connected, we can only use this OpenOcean fractal node, and there's nothing else we can use. Like, we can't go to our cyclical fractals and attach it to time for some reason. Even if I detach that, you can see there's a purple ring here, and apparently that's happily using that. Okay, so see how it's attached to the side? That's these side. If I just zoom in, these parameters are on the side, have been published, and they're not the ones that we want to use. These are all going to change the wrong features. So if I attach it there, it's not going to do anything whatsoever. We want to attach it to essentially to the position or the origin of this fractal. So using the OpenOcean fractal, we can get a reasonably nice result. I'm going to render this out as well, and we'll have a look at how that looks. Okay, so finally we've got our render here, and we've got a scale problem where we've got a large feature, as you can see right there, that's engulfing our terrain. But that's just a simple matter of tweaking the fractal of the ocean fractal that we've got in there. But you can see there that we've got the waves sort of going around the terrain, and if we orient that to be flat on the terrain, or we move the camera around to the other side where we've got it front on, you would be seeing sort of this effect here. If I go backwards, in fact, you can see the waves sort of coming up. Of course, the scale of this is just much too big. So that's about it. They're the three different ways you can do it. And again, I would suggest for anything really serious, you'd want to be using something like RealFlow. The last thing I'd say is with these edges, in View you can output the alphas for that material, for that terrain, and what you can then do in After Effects is just use some sort of post-processing on the edge of that alpha, so do an edge detection in After Effects, and then blur that edge, and or feather it would be better, and that would just help with fading the two terrains together, or the two, to make a more seamless integration between the two, because as we all know, water comes up a beach, it doesn't just stop, it soaks in, and it fades out. So it can be a very difficult effect to pull off. So good luck, and I hope that helps a few people.